This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Half the duration, but no scaling back in North Korea's response. South Korea is still confident its joint drills with the US will achieve their objectives. This as Donald Trump reportedly looks to revive diplomacy with Pyongyang, pushing for another meeting with Kim Jong-un, possibly November. And shares in Unitree, China's best-known humanoid robot maker, soar on their Shanghai trading debut in a milestone listing for the sector. And Hong Kong exchange operator delivers a record second quarter profit, boosted by a surge in initial public offerings. Also tonight, China narrows its gap with the US in reusable rockets after startup Landspace successfully recovers an orbital-class booster on land, joining SpaceX and Blue Origin as the only private firms to do so. Plus, Japan sends its largest ever Asian Games contingent, aiming for a record medal haul. The US and South Korea have halved the duration of joint military drills after President Donald Trump ordered the annual exercises to be substantially scaled back, calling them inappropriate and hostile towards North Korea. Ulchi Freedom Shield, which began this week, will end this Friday after 5 days instead of the planned 11. Despite the change, South Korea's military says that the drills will still meet objectives and maintain a combined defense posture. Pyongyang, which previously described the exercises as an immediate and open threat, lashed out again today, accusing the allies of being warmongers and raising tensions in the Korean peninsula. Well, all this comes as Mr. Trump reportedly pushes for a fresh meeting with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. The Wall Street Journal says that the US president is looking to hold talks with Mr. Kim this autumn, possibly during a November trip to Asia for the APEC summit. And we've got CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk. She joins us live from Seoul. So, Yun-suk, what are we hearing from Seoul about the reasons behind Donald Trump's decision to cut those drills?
Well, it looks like there may have been, several reasons behind that decision. And in fact, Foreign Minister Cho Hyun was actually pressed on that exact question at a parliamentary hearing at the National Assembly. Now, during that session, he pointed to several factors and not just one, and that includes the possible trade issues between Seoul and Washington. Because South Korea did promise $350 billion in investment in the United States. But so far, only, a part of that, around $150 billion has been assigned to an actual project, and that's shipbuilding. But there's still no details or specifics yet on the remaining $200 billion. Then there's this sensitive issue over South Korea's participation in the Iran conflict, including, possible support for U.S. efforts to protect shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, when lawmakers asked Minister Cho Hyun directly whether South Korea's reluctance to join the U.S. could be one of the reasons behind President Trump's decision to scale down the joint military drills, he did not dismiss the possibility, but also he didn't provide any details. Now, lawmakers from both the ruling party and the opposition grilled Minister Cho on this. Meanwhile, several lawmakers were also accusing the South Korean government of being caught completely off guard because South Korea only found out about that decision to downscale the military drills from Trump's own social media post. And that raises another concern here, whether South Korea is also being left out when, what South Koreans call here the Korea passing in talks between Washington and Pyongyang. Now, that Iran connection about the Iran conflict is also why there were several civic groups that held a short rally today. They were outside the presidential office this morning saying that they were against any South Korean military role in the Iran conflict. So let's hear what one of them had to say at the rally.
미국 대통령의 불만 한마디가 대한민국 군사 정책을 결정할 수는 없습니다. 정부가 해야 할 일은 미국의 전쟁에 어떻게 기여할 것인가를 논의하는 것이 아니라 전쟁이 더 이상 확대되지 않도록 외교적 해법을 찾고 평화를 위해 무엇을 할 것인가를 논의해야 합니다.
So there's clearly, opposition here to South Korea getting involved in that Iran conflict. But Foreign Minister Cho Hyun also made another point, which I thought was very interesting, because he did say that, although the military drills were shortened, the North Korean angle remains very important, and that South Korea should seize this rare opportunity and work closely with the United States to move the U.S.-North Korea talks forward. And that sounded as if, if shortening the military drills can help bring North Korea back to the negotiating table, then South Korea is seeing this as an opportunity here, rather than simply a setback.
And Yoon-suk, South Korea, they're also saying that they've resumed ministerial intelligence sharing with the U.S. Do we have more details on that? I mean, what does it tell us about the current state of security cooperation?
Well, that is also very interesting and quite an important development, because Foreign Minister Cho Hyun initially told lawmakers in Parliament that information sharing had resumed, saying that this issue had been largely resolved through consultations between the two sides. But at the end of that parliamentary session, he did come back to clarify his answer, saying that he does not know the exact status or extent of information sharing between the intelligence authorities, and acknowledged that this was not within his area of responsibility. But he did say he can confirm that information sharing between the South Korean Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department is continuing without any problems. Now, this issue over the intelligence sharing dates back to April, when Unification Minister Chung Dong-yong then said, identified Kusong in North Korea as being the site of a suspected nuclear facility. Now, that disclosure became the source of this problem between the two sides, Seoul and Washington, over the handling of sensitive information, intelligence information. And so from what Minister Cho was saying, we still don't have confirmation that intelligence sharing between the two countries' intelligence authorities has been fully restored.
And Yoon-suk, separately from tensions on the Korean peninsula, the South Korean foreign minister, now he is also meeting with the Chinese counterpart today. Basically, what can we expect from Wang Yi's first official visit in 5 years?
Well, yes, it is his first official visit to South Korea in 5 years, so they do have a lot to talk about. They're expected to discuss bilateral issues, but also, the situation on the Korean Peninsula and this wider regional and international issues. And right now, there are two separate diplomatic tracks that South Korea will be watching very closely. One is that possibility of this Trump-Kim summit, and South Korea also wanting to have dialogue with North Korea. Now, the other is the possibility of that Trump-Xi summit, which came up in that parliamentary hearing too by Foreign Minister Cho Hyun. So let's hear what he had to say on that.
지금 9월 미중 정상회담에 관해서는
네.
여러 가지 추측성 이야기만 나오고 있습니다.
네.
오늘 왕이 부장과의 회담을 통해서 저는 그 중국 측의 입장을 좀 많이 들어볼 생각입니다.
Now, the Foreign Minister Cho Hyun also confirmed that South Korea is pursuing a presidential summit with Xi Jinping at the APEC summit in Shenzhen, scheduled to take place later this year. And because Wang Yi also visited Pyongyang, in April and met Kim Jong-un himself, South Korea will be very interested to hear what Beijing knows about what Pyongyang's thinking, and possibly, find a way for South and North Korea to be able to come to a negotiating table too.
Well, many thanks for that update. CNA senior correspondent Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul. Now, we'll have more insights later this hour from a retired South Korean general on the implications of these developments for the alliance between Washington and Seoul. Right, we're going to turn our attention to business news, and we've got Roland here standing by with the very latest updates, and we are talking about Unitree Robotics in focus today. Tell us more about its Shanghai trading debut.
Yep, a stunning bolt up by the humanoid robot maker, with its price rising more than fourfold by the close of trade. Our shares in the Chinese humanoid robot maker soared as much as sixfold shortly after trading began in Shanghai, before it pared some of those gains to end the day at 845 yuan. That's well above the strike price of 150 yuan 80. And the IPO was more than 8,000 times oversubscribed by retail investors. That's a record for Shanghai's star market. Unitree just launched a new high-speed robot called Superman on Monday, and the company has become a symbol of China's drive to dominate robotics. CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yu Guan in Shanghai looks at what investors are buying into with Unitree's debut.
Investors are betting on the larger China story that it can take manufacturing capabilities it already has in motors, sensors, batteries, and other components and combine those with increasingly capable AI. Meanwhile, Unitree here is already one of the most recognizable names in humanoid robotics. It has meaningful sales, it is profitable, and its robots have become some of the most visible symbols of China's push into embodied AI, not just into industries, but eventually into homes as well. And where I'm standing at illustrates that ambition pretty nicely. This is Unitree's first experience store in Asia, right in the middle of Shanghai's Jing'an shopping district. Right across the road from us is Apple's flagship store in Shanghai. Now you have humanoid robots, you have robots dogs displayed here, almost like consumer electronics. Now this guy here, for example, is going for about just $20,000 US, right? And meanwhile, that talking and dancing robot dog is somewhat slightly more affordable, $1,300 US. But the reality really is that today, humanoid robots like these are still largely going to universities, researchers, and business users rather than ordinary households. So investors are not simply valuing Unitree for what it sells today, they're valuing what they think this market could eventually become. And that is why there's already a debate on whether the valuation has run ahead of the business.
The valuation is super demanding, as a fund manager at, 200 times plus PE and 36 times, price to sales. I would say I will pause a little bit because basically that reflects the retail has a lot of hype and oversubscribed, in this names and strategy. But that doesn't mean it's not a good company.
So I think that distinction William made is important. A company can have a very promising future without the price being necessarily justified.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, we dig deeper into China's robot industry with a visit to a conference in Beijing where commercialization is all the talk. And later, the Bank of Korea monitoring the level of household debt, which raced up at its fastest pace in nearly 5 years in the April to June period.
The frenzy for Unitree's shares, China's best-known robot maker, is highlighting enthusiasm for the sector. Well, the firm's IPO today, which is more than 8,000 times oversubscribed, coincides with the opening of the World Robot Conference in Beijing that's bringing together more than 300 companies. Well, authorities say more than 150 products will be launched at the event that runs through Sunday. But after years of dazzling crowds with boxing matches, backflips, and marathon runs, they face a much tougher test. That is real-world utility. Now, we've got Rebecca Mateo joining us live from the conference grounds in Beijing. So, Rebecca, beyond just the scale and the spectacle of all of this year's conference, what does it tell us about how China's robotics industry is developing?
Well, Telly, I must first tell you that it almost feels like I've stepped into the future as I enter those exhibition halls. And just name me a task, and I think probably by now there's a robot inside there that can already do it, from making food and drinks and running stores to working in factories and even performing complex tasks in emergency response. Now, that really goes on to show the scale of China's robotics industry. In fact, industry data shows that Chinese companies accounted for 97% of the global humanoid robot shipments in the first half of this year. And two of the biggest humanoid robot makers, Agibot and Unitree, made up 3/4 of that market. And in fact, more than 70% of these shipments are going towards commercial and industrial users. Now, that really gets us to the bigger story, and we've talked about this last week as well, and that is China is moving from demonstrations to real-world applications. And you spoke about Unitree, so the timing of the conference is also quite striking. Unitree made its Shanghai Stock Exchange debut today after raising some $900 million. And in fact, its founder, Wang Xingxing, will be speaking at the conference tomorrow about the future of the robotics industry in China. And that is really the big question that is hanging over the industry, whether it can be deployed at a large scale and that the industry can go towards commercialization. And now And now analysts say that for that, China has three major advantages, and that is a deep supply chain, a huge domestic market, as well as strong policy and financial support. And we really see this across the major events in China this year. AI at the center, and in fact, upcoming, we also have the World Humanoid Robot Games this weekend, and that really is Beijing driving home the message that it wants embodied AI to be one of the key pillars of its economic growth in the next 5 years. And this, combined with Unitree's success story, is really a confidence booster for the companies here. Let's have a listen.
机器人行业现在整个属于比较就是国家也比较重点扶持的一个项目吧，或者是一个重大方向。然后我们也希望像我们这样的公司，然后像友商这种公司，大家一起真的可以把推动机器人的一些技术和产品上的迭代和升级，然后真的能够去赋能千行百业，走进千家万户。
其实我们还是很客观得去正视的是说，机器人它还是在一个比较早期的一个阶段。但是呢，其实比如像物流的场景，那我们其实对它的期待是它还是接下来会能够，只要一旦能够说去跑通它的一个效率，它是会非常快的就会有个规模化的一个批量化的一个起来的一个速度的。
So, Rebecca, we can see that robotics clearly has become another front in the global tech race. But China, though, I mean, where do they stand?
Well, analysts have said that this year's conference is also a chance to look under the hood of China's robotics industry beyond the flashy humanoids and the finished humanoids robots as well. And they're looking out for two things in particular. First, the progress in physical AI foundation models, essentially the brains of the robots. And second, core hardware, so things like your sensors, reducers, as well as ball screws, sorry for that. And that's really on showcase here at the conference as well, because there are several supply chain companies providing robotics companies with things like sensors, dexterous hands, as well as joint modules. And this is significant because it shows that China is not just building robots, they are essentially creating an ecosystem around the robotics industry. And as you mentioned, increasingly it is becoming another front in the global tech race. In fact, just last month, the US moved to ban new foreign humanoids as well as four-legged robots, imports of them, and essentially targeting China. And to that, Beijing has responded strongly, saying that the U.S. should not overstretch the concept of national security, and is urging Washington to withdraw the measures. But analysts are really expecting competition to still outweigh cooperation, much like what we've seen around EVs, particularly around the software ecosystems and standards. But when it comes to the upstream supply chain, they still expect China to remain as a major global hub. Let's have a listen.
What China does well right now is, for them at least, is local for local. So they replace robots that they used to import from other countries by local suppliers. So with that respect, there is quite a bit of growth also in China. On the long run, I hope that China will be more open to other manufacturers from foreign countries, because there's new technologies coming from other countries.
So experts are saying that the bigger challenge now is really about demand and not so much about the technology anymore. And the real test is really whether these robots can improve productivity and that it makes enough economic sense to deploy them at scale.
All right, many thanks for that report. Appreciate it. Rebecca Mateo there at the World Robot Conference in Beijing. Right, we are going to shift our attention now to business news yet again with Roland Lim. And Roland, Shanghai exchange. Let's talk about that. So it's not the only market that's apparently seeing a lot of IPOs in China. Tell us more about the Hong Kong burst and how it's doing.
Well, it's doing very well, Oteli. IPOs really helped drive that second quarter profit number. Hong Kong's bourse operator turning in record profit for its second quarter. That's on the back of bumper crop of 87 new listings, which raised a total of $27 billion. That's a jump of 94% from the same period last year. The exchange raked in $686 million. That's a jump of 17% from the same period last year. On the back of that, revenue more than $1 billion amid a surge of initial public offerings. Several Chinese AI companies have launched IPOs in Hong Kong this year, in line with what analysts view as China's push to attract overseas funds to finance national technology goals. The Hong Kong exchanges and clearing shares closing more than 2% up after the results were out. The CEO on the outlook.
The pipeline continues to be very strong. I think the fact that there are so many companies eyeing for a Hong Kong IPO actually speaks volume to the ability of, or the strength of the Chinese market in particular, that it is able to turn out so many exciting investment opportunities for the world to partake in.
Let's check in on market action. Chinese stocks sharply down on the mainland, with semiconductor and robotics counters weighed on sentiment, despite Unitree's spectacular debut in Shanghai. The Hang Seng Index ending on the flat line. South Korea's Kospi slid some 5.7%, with two heavyweight chip makers both in the red. SK hynix plummeted to close 9.8% lower, although it did claw back some of the losses after announcing a $28 billion buyback. The rout in Japanese government bonds subsiding, with the 10-year yield slipping slightly to below 2.9%. Now, the 2-year JGB fell slightly to just below 1.68%. Chinese government bonds seeing a continued drop in the long end yields, with the 30-year bond now delivering 2.1%, shrinking the spread over 10-year notes to close at its narrowest since February. Now, traders are piling into longer-term debt in a sign that they foresee prolonged economic softness after the weaker-than-expected economic indicators for the month of July. Now, China is mobilizing $1.6 trillion in a fund meant to boost housing-related consumption. The government is making it easier for people to withdraw from this fund. The revisions, which take effect next month, comes amid a deepening economic slowdown and as property prices continue to fall. Now, nearly 180 million employers and workers nationwide contribute to the collective housing fund. Regulators are reducing conditions for residents to use Provident Fund savings on rent payments. China's State Council will decide lending rates on mortgage loans given out by the housing fund. Policy bank bonds can also be purchased using the Funds Management Center under the new revisions. Analysts say the changes could make interest rate adjustments more flexible. Now, lower rates could offer some support to the housing market as banks become more cautious about lending. South Korea's household loan growth rose at its fastest pace in nearly 5 years in the second quarter, driven by an uptick in home purchases and unsecured borrowing. Household credit reached a record $1.4 trillion as at the end of June, which includes credit card lending. Mortgage-related borrowing rose nearly $9 billion. Other non-mortgage loans, including unsecured credit, more than doubled from the previous quarter, bringing the total loans to households to close to $18 billion. The figures could strengthen the case for another rate hike after the central bank raised its policy rate to 2.75% in July in a bid to ease persistent inflation. The Bank of Korea is meeting next Thursday to discuss monetary policy. And you're up to date with business news at this hour. Thanks
so very much, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Donald Trump scales back drills to South Korea as he reportedly seeks talks with Kim Jong-un. We are going to be speaking to a former South Korean general on what this signals for the region. And in the space race, China closes the reusable rocket gap with the U.S. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Shares of Chinese robot maker Unitree soar more than sixfold on their Shanghai trading debut, highlighting investors' enthusiasm for the sector. The U.S. and South Korea halve the duration of joint drills after the U.S. President Donald Trump calls the military exercises inappropriate and hostile towards North Korea. The American leader reportedly seeking to revive diplomacy with Pyongyang, pushing for another meeting with Kim Jong-un this November. And lots to unpack here. For more insights, let's bring in Chun In-bom, retired Lieutenant General and former commander of South Korea's Special Warfare Command. Well, thanks very much, General, for joining us this evening. First up, just take us inside the military mind for a moment. You know, when Washington scales back an exercise like this, what message do Kim Jong-un and Seoul take from that very same decision?
Well, I think both North and South Korea were surprised by this sudden announcement. I think it took a couple of days for North Korea to digest this information, and I think they're still trying to figure out how to respond. For South Korea, and especially the military, it came as a surprise, and we are in the process of making sure that our training readiness is not affected by this cut.
Yeah, because, I mean, from your experience, I mean, you've actually helped plan such major joint exercises between South Korea and the U.S. But what actually gets lost, you know, when exercises like these are actually cut? And how much, you know, to what extent does it impact military readiness?
So the goal is to make sure that military readiness is not impacted. So there will be minimum impact, or at least that will be the goal. So the scope and scale and duration will be adjusted, but the goal is to maintain readiness. Hopefully for this reduction of time, we will be able to figure out how to achieve the most important thing, which is to maintain deterrence and readiness. And we are in the process of doing exactly that.
Right. Now, you said that this announcement, you know, comes as a surprise to both North and South Korea. And in terms of response, well, what we're hearing from the South Korean foreign minister today is that he says that Trump's order is aimed at pressuring Seoul over Iran. What's your take on this? And I mean, to what extent is it going to work now?
So President Trump explicitly stated that he was disappointed with Korea's response to his request for assistance in the Iran-U.S. conflict that is going on. I don't think that we Koreans blatantly said, no, thank you. But whatever the situation is, I think American expectations are changing, and Korea and many other nations need to understand the change and how we should react. Korea has its own interest in making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open for trade and for oil. We get 70% of our oil through those straits, so it's in our best interest to have participated. And I think the ROC government's reluctance to get into any kind of fight is now paying its price. So we will have to adjust and try to make sure that we act as an ally to the United States, and that the United States feels that we are a reliable ally, and vice versa.
Well, and also, I mean, Trump, basically, he's now reduced those joint drills, which is what North Korea has always wanted, before any talks with Kim Jong-un have actually begun. So I'm curious to know, what does that tell Kim Jong-un about the leverage that he may have if he goes into the meeting with Trump?
Yeah, that's the portion that I'm very concerned about. I think Mr. Trump is trying to show some goodwill, but from my experience, North Korea will just take this as a weakness. And North Korea has been very clear as to what it will take for the United States and North Korea to come to the table, which is the recognition of the DPRK as a nuclear weapon state. That's asking a lot. So we would be looking for a lot in return.
And I mean, whatever Trump and Kim might agree, I mean, that seems like South Korea has quite a bit of an enormous stake in the outcome. So if Trump and Kim were to have this one-on-one, where does that leave South Korea? I mean, how much influence does Seoul actually have over this Trump-Kim negotiation?
Well, the current Lee Jae-myung administration has been very clear that we support such a one-on-one dialogue between the United States and the DPRK, that we would be more than happy to be the pacemaker of such negotiations. So the current Korean government would be very supportive of the idea. Now, on the other hand, staunch conservatives would be very concerned, and there's a good possibility that the conservatives in South Korea would want more security guarantees to include maybe South Korean indigenous nuclear weapons.
So, I mean, Seoul, of course, now looking at its own longer-term defense. We've got President Lee talking about taking back wartime operational control, and he talked about accelerating nuclear-powered submarines as Trump, changes these exercises. So, from where you are sitting, I mean, what is South Korea basically preparing itself for?
South Korea wants to be more independent, to be able to have more ownership. But I think the South Koreans, especially this current administration, needs to understand that talk alone is not going to do it, that we will need to have a great deal of sacrifice and investment in achieving these goals.
So let's just talk about if that summit actually happens, because the last time Trump met Kim, we talked, the objective was about denuclearization. But North Korea today, I mean, they're in a different state, right? They've got larger arsenal, they've got their weapons that are becoming increasingly capable of reaching even the American homeland. So General Chun, what is a realistic negotiation actually about now if that summit happens?
I think the biggest concern now is that North Korea can reach the United States, but not 100%. But they're getting there. And so before North Korea has this capability, it is imperative that the United States try to block this as much as possible. The real question is, what kind of security guarantees will South Korea need to see this kind of arrangement between the United States and the DPRK supported by the South Koreans? So it'll have to be a very strong security guarantee by the United States for the South Koreans to be comfortable with this idea.
Well, South Korea did say that realistically, chances of talks even happening would be rather difficult. But I really appreciate your insight. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. But thanks for joining us this evening. Chun In-bum, retired Lieutenant General and former commander of South Korea's Special Warfare Command. Now, Japan has criticized U.S. sanctions against the president of the International Criminal Court, calling the move very unfortunate. Now, Japan's foreign ministry says it has consistently supported the ICC in prosecuting the most serious crimes. It adds that Tokyo will remain committed to strengthening the rule of law internationally while maintaining communication with relevant countries. Now, the statement follows Washington's decision to sanction ICC President Tomoko Akane, a Japanese national and a senior trial lawyer from Senegal. The U.S. says that the two were involved in efforts to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute officials whose governments do not accept the court's jurisdiction. A U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has accused the ICC of being corrupt and fatally politicized and exceeding its mandate. Washington says that the sanctions are intended to protect American sovereignty and shield U.S. personnel and allies from what it describes as illegitimate actions by the court. Now, the measures include blocking property and financial interests under U.S. jurisdiction. The ICC, meantime, has rejected the sanctions, saying they undermine the rule of law and threaten international legal order. The U.S. and Israel are not members of the court and do not recognize its jurisdiction. The latest sanctions are part of the Trump administration's wider campaign against the ICC. China has successfully recovered the first stage of an orbital-class rocket on land for the first time. The latest breakthrough brings Beijing closer to mastering reusable rocket technology that's already used by the U.S. companies SpaceX and Blue Origin. The Unitree 3 rocket, developed by Chinese startup Landspace, lifted off from northwestern China today. Its first stage booster later returned to a landing site using deployable legs. Now, reusable boosters can significantly reduce the cost of space launches by allowing expensive rocket components to be flown multiple times. Landspace says that the Unitree 3 booster is designed to be reused up to 20 times. China recovered a rocket stage at sea last month. This comes as Beijing seeks to expand high-frequency, lower-cost commercial launches. This milestone narrows China's gap in a reusable rocket race led by the United States. Well, U.S. companies SpaceX and Blue Origin have been recovering boosters since 2015. And Japan as well is testing reusable rockets with an aim to lower costs. Well, still lots to come on East Asia tonight. Meta goes on trial in the U.S. over allegations it deliberately made Instagram and Facebook addictive to children. And climate change reshapes Asia's food bowl, forcing farmers to rethink how and what they grow. As Asian nations move towards limiting youth access to social media, a high-stakes landmark trial against Meta has opened in the U.S., and it's been dubbed social media's big tobacco moment. A coalition of 29 U.S. states, they're seeking fundamental changes to how Meta operates and penalties that could, in theory, total as much as $1.4 trillion. 4 key states represent the coalition: California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey. The world's largest social media company by user reach is accused of deliberately making its platforms addictive to young users. The first witness to take the stand was former Facebook safety executive Arturo Bejar. Now, he told the court that safety was an afterthought, as the goal was to get things into users' hands as fast as possible. Our prosecutors claim that Meta designed platforms such as Facebook and Instagram to hook young users, fueling anxiety, depression, and even suicide.
The public is going to hear about how Meta profited from our kids' information and engagement on the platform. Meta knew that its business strategy was harming kids and that sustained engagement on this platform correlated and caused worse mental health.
Meta has rejected those accusations. Attorney Paul Schmidt acknowledged in court that some users struggled with their use of social media, but argued that the company tried to develop tools to help them. Now, families who claim Meta's platforms played a role in their children's deaths rallied outside the federal courthouse in Oakland, California.
Owl didn't die by accident. She died by design.
But behind my daughter, we knew and loved she was fighting a battle we could not see, a battle within the world of social media.
My son was killed. It's a design choice, a company that builds its platforms to maximize a child's engagement, click after click, at the cost of the child's safety. They knew what they were doing.
Well, AI giants are also facing legal pressures over protections for minors on their platforms. In response, OpenAI is introducing stronger safeguards and monitoring with ChatGPT for teens. Modified parameters will automatically be deployed for users registered under 18 or those detected to be underage. And that includes restrictions for high-risk topics such as self-harm, violence, and eating disorders. The new program also offers study mode, where guiding questions will be given instead of direct answers. Parents will be given the choice to link accounts with their teens, to control settings such as blackout quiet hours, and receive alerts if there are discussions on sensitive content. Both the teen and the parent or guardian must opt in for parental controls to be used. Well, OpenAI is currently facing several wrongful death lawsuits, including by parents of a 16-year-old who committed suicide, allegedly using methods advised by ChatGPT. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission has launched an inquiry into AI chatbots that act as digital companions, focusing on potential risks to children and teenagers. Looks like climate change is forcing farmers to rethink how they grow food and even what they grow. The choices they make have far-reaching effects on food security and the livelihoods of those who actually depend on the harvest. Well, this week's CNA correspondent looks at how farmers and scientists across Asia are navigating these challenges.
Indian mangoes are highly sought after in places all across the globe. Just about 1% is exported, making India's king of fruits all the more special. But this prized crop is under threat. Unseasonal rain, intense heat. The effects of climate change are becoming increasingly visible and destructive.
छोटा वाला आम देख रहे हैं और ये हमारा जो है एक सही साइज है, परफेक्ट साइज है, जो ऐसा होना चाहिए था, लेकिन उस अनशेड्यूल्ड बारिश की वजह से ये साइज हमारा ऐसा रह गया.
Unpredictable weather means unpredictable income.
Here in northern India's mango belt, the crop provides livelihoods for entire villages. Many of these farm workers come from families who have tended to orchards like this for generations. So when production is disrupted, the impact is felt across the community.
As the world's appetite for Indian mangoes grows, the long-term rule of the king of fruits will ultimately be decided here by how well these orchards adapt to increasing climate pressures.
With temperatures often crossing 45 degrees Celsius here, the olive crop has been promoted as a perfect climate-resilient alternative. In southern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, water scarcity is also a growing concern. And this crop is a good fit, farmers say, because it needs minimal water to survive these harsh conditions.
Officials say promoting olive cultivation is central to Pakistan's climate adaptation efforts as the country seeks to safeguard its food security.
These olive plants are, most profitable plants in Pakistan, especially for Pakistan atmosphere and climate, because for small farmers, they can on small scale if even have 100 and 200 plants.
Whether Pakistan can build a truly climate resilient agriculture sector will depend on how quickly innovation, better water management and climate smart farming reach fields across this South Asian nation.
Rice is a staple for billions of people worldwide, but it's also a major source of methane, a potent greenhouse gas. Now, a breakthrough by a Singapore Research Institute can change that.
Farmers were provided with rice seeds, fertilizers and pesticides for the trial. The first planting season began in September 2025 and wrapped up in February this year. The study covered nearly 100 hectares of rice fields using an integrated approach.
We got around methane reduction of up to 50%. We have a three-pronged approach. One approach is that change the irrigation methodology, like AWD, which is alternate wetting and drying. And also we have our own fertilizer cocktail, which we developed, a scientifically based and then nature-driven fertilizer cocktail we have. We use that. And also we have varieties to test as well, because genetics matter. So all these things put together, the results were positive, and we could increase the yield of the farmers by 6%, even though it was flooding.
The second season of large-scale trials is now underway, with a final report expected by the end of the year. The next phase, scaling up adoption across Asia, is targeted to begin in 2027.
Well, if you'd like to find out more, you can catch the full episode of CNA Correspondents Feeding Asia's Future tonight at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. Preparations for the Asian Games in Japan are in full swing, with the event kicking off in Nagoya and the wider Aichi region a month from now. Now, for the host country, they're hoping to surpass their previous medal haul at the 2023 Games in China. And CNA senior correspondent Michio Ishida has this report.
Japan is sending its largest ever delegation of about 930 athletes to this year's Asian Games, which will take place on home ground. And the team is pumped up for Japan's biggest sporting event since the Tokyo Olympics, including table tennis player Mima Ito, who won Japan's first mixed doubles gold at the Olympics in 2021.
アジア競技大会には初めて出場させてもらうんですけど、今回は団体戦とミックスダブルスということで、東京オリンピックぶり名古屋の場所で試合をすることをとても楽しみにしているので。
Of the 43 sports featured at next month's Asian Games, 6 are making their debut, such as teqball. Akinori Wase will lead Japan's charge in the sport, which combines elements from football and table tennis, and is sometimes used as part of warm-up routines.
サッカーのアップダウンで使われる競技ではなくて、しっかりとメダルを取ってテックボールが正式な競技として認知していただけるように、しっかりと金メダルを狙って頑張っていきたいと思います。
Saki Tsukamoto represents another new sport, paddle, a hybrid of tennis and squash.
私個人としても初めてのアジア大会ということで非常に緊張しております。やってみたい、見てみたい。一人でも多くの皆さんにそう言って思っていただけるように、まずは結果で頑張っていきたいと思います。
For some other athletes, the competition is a chance to measure themselves against the best. 17-year-old Taiju Goto is a rising star in athletics, who holds the under-18 world record in the 400-meter hurdles.
自分より全然速いタイムで走る選手がいるので、そういった世界のレベルを肌で感じたいなって思ってます。
This time round, Team Japan is hoping to beat their haul of 188 medals at the previous Asian Games in Hangzhou.
常に目標は過去最高だったもんですから、この188を超えるというのが私としての目標です。
And they are getting some royal support. Princess Kako, daughter of Crown Prince Akishino, was at the send-off ceremony on Wednesday. This is Japan's first time hosting the Asian Games in 32 years after the 1994 edition in Hiroshima. 45 countries and regions are expected to participate at the event, which begins on the 19th of September. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
I hope you've enjoyed this Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Headlines anytime. You can find it at cna.asia. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow.